Hi, in this video we're going to talk a little bit about the history of ancient Greece. Um, so we're just going to go do an overview of all periods that might be colloquially called ancient in Greek history, and some different things that are important, salient to keep in mind for each of those periods. So this is really just an overview. So first of all, we're going to talk about the stages of history in ancient Greece: the Archaic period, Classical Greece, Hellenistic Greece, and Roman Greece. The Archaic period is sometimes what I think what a lot of people think of when they think of ancient Greece. Uh, Certainly, all of these would be categorized as ancient, but sort of myths and legends. A lot of them originate from here. Very old sources like Hesiod draw upon probably an oral history that goes here. The Iliad and the Odyssey almost certainly describe a period of time around or after the Mycenaean age, and we're just going to call everything essentially before 800 BC the Archaic period for the today's purposes. But there are other periods. The Archaic period is not super well necessarily preserved. Um, we have written records that go back a really long ways, but we don't necessarily know a ton about all of these periods. And the Archaic period itself, especially Mycenaean civilization, you could do courses on that. Really, you could do courses on all of these, but there's a lot there that might not still be understood. Um, so the Archaic period, we've got Mycenaean civilization, this huge civilization with very probably different culture than we often think of the ancient Greeks as having. Uh, it's almost we think of ancient Greece a lot of times in terms of like philosophers and stuff, but this is really sort of the epic mythic past of ancient Greece. Um, they had their own alphabet that is not these are not the Greek symbols you're used to. They're almost pictographic, but they're syllables. They represent syllables, but they look like they represent sort of pictures and ideas like that. It's a syllabic writing system. It's very interesting. You should look it up and look into it. There's also Linear A if you're interested. We know less about that than Linear B, but Linear B wrote uh, in the Greek language. When Mycenaean civilization collapsed, we saw a loss of this Linear B, so there was very little to no writing in the region after the collapse of Mycenaean civilization. And this seems to correspond with the period after the Trojan War, the period we think of as the Trojan War. Lots of different ideas on what that might mean, how true ideas of Troy existing are. Um, but certainly there was a big catastrophe, and the sentiment of this huge catastrophe economically in the region um, is very well preserved in the Iliad and the Odyssey. This led to the Dark Ages, a period of time where essentially there was uh, very little civilization to speak of, no writing system. We don't know very much about it. The economy of the region seems to have collapsed. A lot fewer artifacts. Um, and then, as the Archaic period winds down, we see a reintroduction of writing through the Greek writing system, which was a modification of the Phoenician writing system, which itself comes from earlier forms. So the Phoenicians were traders, and they uh, they spread this writing system around, and this, along with some other factors, probably led to the rise of Greece and Greek culture in the region where modern Greece is. This led to the rise of city-states, and so instead of people just sort of loosely being connected through family and kinship relationships, they started to have more formalized forms of government in their cities, and this led to some early wars and also the rise of a mercantile class. We see a lot more coinage here, and towards the end of the Archaic period, and uh, a lot more trade. The economy starts to pick up after hundreds of years of being down, and this is really the origin of Greek law as we know it. We have the laws of Athens and Sparta being sort of formalized at the beginning of the Classical period and the end of the Archaic period. and a lot of the religious sort of sentiments and ideas and mythology starting to be written down. And so this is sort of when a lot of things that were very Greek and always existed or existed for a very long time started to be sort of codified, including their law and their city-states. In the classical period, we see a lot of rebellions against Persians, who then came to, during this period, were dominating the city-states. This culminated in sort of the Great War against the Persians, and the Battle of Marathon, in which Athens was able to sort of inexplicably free itself from a much larger army. The Persians were advancing their interests all throughout Greece, and Athens put together an army to battle the Persian troops, who far outnumbered them, but were they were very, very poorly trained and had many fewer resources. They famously had wicker shields. So in this battle, the Athenian forces ran fully armed towards the Persian troops and actually chased them into the water. It's a huge, humiliating defeat for the Persians. There's also you might have heard of the naval battles the Greeks were involved in which they won for themselves. They cemented essentially their win for freedom. You might have watched the movie 300, all about sort of the Persians versus the Greeks. And the Persians in this time period were occupying a space in physical space where Turkey and modern day Iran and those sorts of countries are. So basically from Turkey to Afghanistan, you can think about it's a very old civilization, and they were thought of themselves as this big empire, very powerful empire, but they were not very good at battle against heavily armed troops, especially well-trained heavily armed troops. So this led to a rule by the polis, so the city-states that were cemented in the Archaic period came to be very stable rulers of their own very small regions. But because of these recurring problems with Persia, we had these leagues of cities. And I'm not sure if I said it, but I'm coming back to the Peloponnesian War. This led to these leagues of cities to defend for mutual defense against Persia. You can sort of think of it as on a World War II almost analogy, like the Allies and the Axis or whatever, with Persia maybe being the Axis, however you want to split it. But after the defeat of Persia, after Persia's essentially not coming back, I should have put this after this League of Cities thing, we have Sparta and Athens both sort of rising up to try to protect the Greek world from Persia, and then they come head to head with each other in the Peloponnesian War. And so that is sort of this is the characteristic sort of struggles of the classical Greek age. There are other interesting things you can learn about, but we're just doing an overview here. The next phase is Hellenistic Greece. It's kind of an interesting name because Hellen is the Greek word for an individual Greek. So it's sort of like Greekish Greece. It's sort of a strange way to say it. But what we see here in this period is the end of the sort of absolute independence of the city-states. This idea of the leagues has sort of taken hold, and we see sort of like larger confederations of Greek city-states. Alexander the Great comes in, and in this period he constructs his large empire that, instead of just protecting Greece from the Persians, actually conquers Persia, large swaths of land, huge swaths of land in a very short period of time, because of his superior weapons and superior tactics. He was a very talented general. And they were able to take over large swaths of land very quickly. He actually died essentially after conquering it all. But his empire was broken up into pieces, and those pieces, which included Egypt, the former Persian Empire, the Levant, and Greece, they were able to continue to spread Greek culture and the Greek language throughout the rest of the ancient world, or throughout that area in the ancient world. Interestingly enough, in places we think of nowadays as being Buddhist, there are actually Greek inscriptions because Greek made it very far. It made it through past Afghanistan up to sort of the borders of China. We can think about it. And this Koine Greek, this was a period in which Greek was used as the common lingua franca for the region. Koine in Greek means common. So this is the common version of Greek. And it's very closely related to the Attic or Athenian sort of dialect of Greek, but it's sort of a dialect of Greek that was used commonly by people all throughout the Mediterranean, including in places like Egypt. So if you were to learn Coptic, Coptic has tons of words from Koine Greek in it. The New Testament is written in Koine Greek. A lot of later works in Greek are written in Koine Greek. And so this was sort of a ubiquitous means of expression for people all throughout the Mediterranean. And then in the Roman era, we have the end of Greek independence. They're conquered by the Romans, and they're not going to be independent again until essentially the modern era. After they're conquered by the Romans, they will form part of the Byzantine Empire, and you could say that they're sort of in charge in that sense. But it's still sort of part of the Roman Empire. Culturally, we consider it sort of the Eastern Roman Empire, and then the Ottomans take them over. And then after the Ottomans take them over, that lasts until the modern era, until the modern state of Greece. They are also taken over in World War II, unfortunately, by the Nazis, I believe. But there were several revolts against the Romans in this time period. The mixing of Greek and Roman cultures occurred, so a lot of that was the Romans adopting a lot of Greek ideas, Greek cultures, language, customs. It even got to the point where sounding like you were a Greek was sort of a posh thing to do in ancient Rome. But that's not the only way it went. There were a lot of Roman ideas and a Roman ethic that made its way into Greece, which is why when the Roman Empire was split into the Byzantine Empire, that really still considered itself heir to the ancient Roman Empire. And we see the continued use of Greek in the East. So during this period, you'll see, even though the Romans had conquered the east of their empire, obviously, they'll continue to use Greek. So I got a lot of information for this from Wikipedia, but you can get information, you can go there and read some more specifics. I would encourage you to do that. Also, there are a lot of great sources on the internet for this, so just keep in mind a lot of places to go. Okay.